Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think we made progress on there, so we can fiddle with that later and just run it by the guys now, see what they think.
Yeah. What I'll do is, I think in terms of the heading of the how-to rubric, I'll write some thoughts out. I'll just send you just that rubric without having to have the other 70 megs of information chain along.
Hi, Fabian. This is hello. We've been working a little bit, Mark and I, on the journal today, arguing like crazy, as one should. And the issues we have is to make it really easy for everyone is that is easy for contributors and readers. Mark has really been fighting in the corner for future readers, which is great. So, we have at least 3 types of contents. We have articles, which are mostly by me now, but there's a few people coming, which is great, as we've had for the books. We have stuff that I scrape that you guys just post on Twitter that I turn into an article. And then we have the guest presentations. So what we've done is for guest presentation, we write the name : guest presentation. So it always starts with the name. So here, these are 2 articles I've written, but then when it's a conversation, because it's so many people, we just say conversation and then we put that. In the metadata, we still know who wrote it, because otherwise it may get a bit messy. What do you think?
Makes sense.
One of the things that we've just been batting about is, of course, that, in the ideal world, everyone's going to be reading this PDF with a sort of visual meta capable reader. But today, that's probably an over expectation. So one of the things we're talking about is we'll need to have a little explanation at the beginning to say that, the layout may look a bit odd to to some people's eyes, but this has always been carefully done so that, for instance, if you copy from the document, it will pick up the citational information. So we have the metadata addressability. So to a certain extent, something has to give between probably a purely traditional type layout and what we can do. But I think it's very important. The key part of the process here is to have the clean visual meta, which is hopefully going to enable all these other lovely things we want to do. So I don't have any problem with that, with stepping away from some of the existing print conventions to get that part right.
I think especially for new readers, if there is a right way, let's say, to consume and to read, at least what usually makes me go the extra step of installing or testing anything is, how do you say, short-sighted benefits. Like, as soon as I get that, okay, if I read this with a quote-unquote right reader, then I'll be able to do X, Y, Z, and thus I'm going to install it or go a bit out of the usual path. So
that's nice. I think you've expressed that very nicely. I think we can capture that. Yeah.
We're still working on that here. We also want to introduce the community. But one other thing to tell you, Fabian, before Brandel comes here, only because I have already talked to him about this, is ironically enough, Brandel being so brilliant and working at Apple, he's not really interested in Apple systems. So when we had the meeting on Monday and then another meeting, we looked at the package contents of a document from author, which is called a .liquid file. And on the Mac, if you control click on such a file, you get an option to show package contents. Actually, I'll show you that really briefly because it's very relevant to our discussion. Messy desktop, I do apologize. Trying to organize family pictures. Right, so show package contents. Hello, Brandel. Just introducing Fabian to the show package contents thing. So this is what, Fabian, you know that Brandel on Monday, you were there, right?
No.
Okay. Oh, no, of course not. Monday was very quiet. So what Brandel did that was quite magical, he went through this package contents. And for instance, we have glossary. So we open that in BB Edit or whatever. And it's quite organized because it is JSON data. In this case, there's nothing. But a lot of the stuff is here. So Brandel, actually, are you in a position to show what you did? Because that would be really nice to see now.
Yeah.
So while Brandel's doing that, for context, Fabian, the thinking is that, yes, we will continue to try to do something with Visual Meta, of course. I think that's important. Well, actually, I will do a screen share. But also because we have this format, and yes, my company owns it, but it is a completely open format, this .liquid. So we can do things like this. So actually, now I'm going to open this. So what is it, the whole thing, Brandel, or is it only the?
I can show it. So let's just get it lined up. So I'll have author. What do I need to have shown?
This is so cool. I'm actually going to physically sit on my hands while Brandel does his demo.
So there's a 3D page. Sure, let's do that. So there's a 3D page here. This is 3D, but there's just nothing on it. And here's an author file. I can actually look at it here. And this is mostly about being able to get this map view up and running. So there's this cross-linked system where text is a word that has a definition, and then both the words type and toy have a definition that depends on text. You can see that here. It says type is used for making text. Toys sometimes include text, and it also is something with a type. And then this thing has a definition, but it doesn't relate to anything. It's not a useful definition.
And the reason it's yellow, by the way, is that it's not in the documents rather than blue.
Oh, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, so there's a range of sort of things that are represented here in various ways. And when you go to the author document here, you drag it into Chrome, you end up with this.
Hang on, you don't even have to zip it anymore?
No, so in Chrome, you can just drop the author document. In Safari, it's necessary to unzip it.
Okay.
Well, it's not so much you unzip it. In fact, you don't unzip it. What you do is change the file extension, and then Safari is able to recognize it. That's actually so that's something that I am going to talk to the Safari team about, whether it's a bug, because when you drag something that is a .package or whatever it is that sort of clarifies to Mac OS that something is a package in Safari, it turns up as a single file, whereas as you can see from this, it's a large, it's actually quite a large list of multiple elements, and so yeah, you get access to all of those other elements. But yeah, so then that means it's possible to construct this link structure of saying that here we have those dependencies, those inward dependencies where text doesn't depend on those things. And this is all just done on Hover, but you know, it's and this is not a device, this Mac with VR attached to it, but you can see that it is a page that would allow you to do that. So that's good for being able to see this dynamic view. It's also sort of an existence proof that it's possible to pull all of these things out. You know, one of the things that would be possible, so you can see this has definition, this doesn't have any hover states at all because it doesn't have a definition associated with it. This one has its definition underneath that. And this isn't using the text package Troika, but just using the very naive approach of just encoding those things onto textures. But yeah, like you won't be able to drag and drop this archive on Quest because Quest doesn't have a file browser that allows you to do that sort of drag and drop. You may be able to select a folder, but you would be able to, hey Bob, you would be able to potentially make a connection between a computer, a Mac or a PC with access to the author file, or the liquid file, and then send the processing of it over as a series of messages through a connection, or put these up online on a server where you could do that. And even though these files are large at times, so the proceedings file for the journal is 700 megabytes, the actual text files that are pertinent to this part of it are only something on the order of a few hundred K. So Bob, I was just saying that this is an author file in Froda's application, and it has these sort of cross links based on the definitions. This thing, DLiBocker, has a definition which includes toy, and so you can see that it has a link in that direction. That's that kind of thing. And I was able to, I just realized that, drag this file across and put it on here. And so this is something that happens sometimes, and I haven't really managed to figure out why, is that the sticks end up pointing in the wrong direction. So I'm curious as to why that is happening. But yeah, so the sort of the structure of the document is the same, and it means that we can ingest things that have these rich relationships. So yeah, it's a useful first step when you look inside these author liquid files. Then you're able to see all of the content and what's going on in them. And so yeah, it's pretty straightforward to sort of obtain information out of this dynamic view and turn it into what you see on the screen here, except hopefully with these angles working.
I just have to add two things. Number one, Brandel, thank you again. And secondly, for the rest of you, if you want to play with this format, as I said, it's completely open and simple. It's just a bunch of plists and JSON and that kind of stuff. That means that if we build a way to get it from author into Oculus, you can, if it has access to read, write both directions, you can actually move it about in 3D. And then when you get back to your normal computer, that will be encoded. But of course, you'll still just see it in XY, but it'll be there for next time. So it means that we finally have the opportunity to build a normal document in and out of VR, because to me, Mark and I were talking about visual things earlier today, and I'm really hung up on visuals. I'm, Chelsea School of Art background and all of that. I'm pixel peeper, got to have megapixels. When I'm in Oculus, it does bother me that it isn't sharp. But what is amazing, of course, is when you move your head. It's like you have, looking through a fence, you move your head, and suddenly it's clearer. So I think we agree that one of the chief benefits of working in VR is seeing relationships and items, not just lists. So therefore, it should be, if we can have an authoring package, and again, anybody should be able to write to this kind of thing. We can do things in VR and take it out again. It's amazing.
Yes.
And Bob, currently it is document based, but that doesn't mean we can't make the document be landscape and suddenly we have a mural, because these are vectors, so the scale is still infinite.
Yes.
Fabian, what do you think?
I did not try Reader and Author because I don't have a Mac. So it's a pretty
crazy.
I know. And then when I saw the emails earlier or during the week about it, I was like, yeah, but to me, that's just remote, let's say, where I don't have access to that. And even though it sounds a little bit, how do you say, not trivial, but anecdotal, one of the reasons I don't have a Mac is because I want to be able to tinker with anything on my computer. Doesn't mean I'm able to. There are things, let's say, at the kernel level, whatever, that's way over my head, where I never bothered to. But that's also quite important to me, that whatever I were to, or if I want to at some point tinker with, whatever part of my computer, I can do that. So at that point, I understand some of the features, but unfortunately, it's, yeah, I can't play with that. So I'm looking at that from the outside, let's say.
Well, maybe from the outside, of course, initially from the outside. But the thing is, and I have to defensively reiterate again, yes, I do have a small independent software development company, still haven't made enough money to actually take money out of it. So it is just trying to support the development, but all the formats are open. Now, having said that, again, the thinking here is that maybe you could have that package too. And what you're interested in is just some of the JSON files in whatever environment you choose to have on Linux or wherever you want it to be. It's just so because we have this, so in a way it's free. So the fact that Author is there, for me, it's nice. And we do have a free version of Author, but it means it is a thing you can take in and out of VR. Because I look at this as the difference between published and manuscripts. Published is, of course, in this world, in my world, still a PDF with Visual Meta. But this is so much easier to extract the data out of, because it's just a bunch of files that has the JSON. So even if you don't have the full authoring environment, Brandel, do you want to talk maybe about how if you only consider, let's say, the glossary and the map, forgetting everything else, it's still quite accessible?
I mean, it's as I was kind of saying before we got to parsing it, that it's if you have a readable sort of set of relationships, it's not a particular challenge to process those into sort of obtaining relevant positional data and things like that. And so this is no exception. It's JSON with nodes with unique identifiers and X and Y positions. So yeah, like in terms of finding things, it's just that most of the time when people produce documents at this point, unless they're illustrated documents and otherwise, then there's not a lot of relevant information to parse and process in X and Y for something that constitutes a graph of things. And so, yeah, it provides a useful starting point for something that people have the ability to author in a way that can make something that's representable in VR.
A quick question, because again, I skimmed through, but does it mean the JSON and plist are separated from the PDF, and that the final file or the merge of PDF and this metadata?
This has nothing to do with PDF. So this is the equivalent of a .docx rather than a .pdf.
Yeah, the internal interchange format doesn't contain a PDF at all, but Author does target the PDF ultimately, and that's where the Visual Meta sort of components come in. One thing about that current PDF is that it doesn't, well, that current implementation of the Visual Meta is that it doesn't include the positional data for the graph, because it's not sort of identified as a relevant component for the purposes that it had currently been kind of stood up for. And so it would be possible for it to be dumped out, but it just isn't right now. Yeah.
Mr. Anderson, who was muted.
Just a quick one, because so Brendel and Fabio will understand the import of this more than me, but I've just been looking through the package contents. So one thing that's not exposed in that at the moment is effectively the DOM, if I understand it. In other words, the document structure. It
kind of is. It is in the RTFD. Well,
it's in the RTFD. Yeah, it's not in a which is. Well, I guess it's RTFD, so I mean, yes, it's parsable, but it's only in there. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I was just wondering if I understand it's in there. I didn't think RTFD as such had the structure. It's just it's got the whole text, and from the text you can get the structure.
Exactly.
I guess that's what I'm getting at, but I don't want to go too far into the weeds. Anyway.
So the reason
I'm not sure. There is a very large plist, particularly in the Sirius document, the proceedings document, and I don't exactly know how to walk that plist. I took a look at it in Xcode, and it has a large tree hierarchy in it of definitions that may pertain to that main document. And to that end, it may have semantically relevant sort of components to it, but I'm not aware of the way to read that right now. But given what's present in the other things, the dynamic view, the definitions, the glossary, they are all there. How they are reconciled may be something where it's one thing with the dynamic view. The relationship between the actual definitions is not codified in the script, in the file. Those are constructed on the basis of the contents of the text, and so I just reproduced that dependency. If it may be the case that the RTF is actually the ground truth, but if so, then it shouldn't be too hard because Author doesn't have free formatting abilities such that if you have text this size and that color and whatever, if there's a hard relationship between, if text is this size, it is this, then we'll be able to retrieve it from that. But, yeah.
Which is exactly the case. Yeah, I mean, the reason I think this is a big breakthrough, that we have this piece of infrastructure that we can maybe play with, is, for instance, I expect that Adam will not agree with this because he's very much off in a different tangents, and I think that's a good thing. So what I would very much like is for us to work towards a opportunity for an environment where I write a document, and the document could be a sentence or 200 pages, doesn't matter, but a thing. Let's think of it as an index card. And I put it into our VR space. It's like, Adam, this is my proposal. And it's there. And whatever metadata that we've just discussed is available. So you guys can literally pick it to pieces, say, well, look at this glossary, it doesn't work with that. So all that is available. The main body, I'm not really worried about, but all these things. And then Adam can say, well, actually, I think we should do this kind of a format and put a card up here in space. But the questions then become, how do these two know about each other? Do we write the relationship of one onto the other, or do we have a new JSON to describe the relationship of the documents in the room? These are really important issues that I think we can work about. But in terms of us as kind of a community becoming quite real, the simple demonstration of working in Author, clicking a button, and we already have the ability to post to WordPress, so it's not that hard to interact with a web server. It puts that into the user's registered VR space, whichever one that you guys have designed, and you look at it. I can imagine sending that to Vint Cerf and saying, this is real, and it's a thing that goes in and out, that it'll be much easier for him to help us network, get funding, and all of that stuff. Yeah, Fabien, please.
So I'm still trying to put the pieces together. But one thing I wanted to mention about the not having a Mac part is because I don't, but I do have a browser, and I guess all of us do, obviously, and the Quest also does have one, and they are because Author in the end, if I understood it right, does output to PDF with more things. They're also like PDF.js, like readers of PDF in the browser, and that are up to date, pretty powerful, and give visually good results. So I'm wondering at what point it could be interesting to consider a web-based version of Reader that would be able to have those features, but without anybody having to install anything, and even including some server-side API that would be able to get any update from, let's say, usage in VR.
Well, that's a really important question. I think that's largely up to the guys in the community who want to develop. You know, you basically build what you want. But there is
Well,
a really big
no,
difference.
I think what Fabien's suggesting is that you could actually make Author an app, even a paid app, over the web. There's very little about the way that the application works that would be dependent on acting as a native application on your local system. The benefit of that being that it would be visually and functionally similar, identical to the capabilities that you have within the downloadable app today, but with the added benefit that it would work on all platforms immediately, and also have the benefit of being able to kind of jump into virtual reality at that same instant.
Thank you for that translation. That was actually useful. I spent a lot of my family money on building Reader and Author, because the way that my brain works, I think it's the same with you guys actually. Imagination is limited. You know, I build to what I know, and then you get to that level, it's like, oh damn, we need to go down this alley. So to build it from scratch would not have been super expensive. To build it the way I did was quite expensive. So I can't really afford to change platform now. But logically, I think that's makes complete sense. The only, sorry, that's my mother, it's her birthday. I will tell her, I'll call her later. I apologize. Yeah, the other thing is performance, because Author is optimized now finally for the M1, and it makes a huge difference. Even to generate a PDF takes quite a bit of time, because it has to do a lot of nonsense. But one thing that could be interesting is to also have a minimal version of Author on the web. So if, you know, to do at least the basics, I think that's maybe what you guys are pushing at. That would make sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And that would then go past a lot of the, how do you get the document up? You'd still, for those who still want to use a normal offline Author, they would still need a way to synchronize the documents. But I'm sure, at least in the Mac community, iCloud can be used, but you should be able to use the Author web independently of anything. Yeah, Mark.
No, I just was going to reflect on something that a really interesting point Brunel made in referring to when we just mentioned the DOM, is this fact of something to hold on to is actually not having text that has just abstract styling, which is something that a whole generation, well, generations of us have learned to do, fiddling around in Microsoft Word or something. So that, you know, in a sense, a benefit, it's both a limit and a benefit in Author, is you can't color too far outside the lines in terms of what something means structurally. And if we want to have a good movement backwards and forwards, I actually see that as a good thing. We may need to change our attitudes to some things, but that's fine. That's all part of, you know, progress. But I really like this idea that it removes some of the ambiguity. So if we capture that structure, there's a lot less guesswork.
So yeah, that's a good point. So guys, we're having an argument now, an intellectual argument, which is good. So, and kind of dog fooding ourselves. If we were now in a virtual reality space, we would probably want to put nodes or documents or whatever you want to call it into this space and say, here's the thing for that. Yeah, but there's the thing against that. What kind of thoughts do you all have on that? Because that seems to me to be an early and real use case. I see that, Fabien, the link you sent, I'll have a look at that also, but I'm just wondering, how would you want to do that?
Would you repeat again what the question is?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was distracted.
No.
I'm not.
With the greatest joy.
I tend to tune out when all there's code talk.
Okay.
So if there's a switch, it's a rapid switch. I have to pay attention again.
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, we're having now a discussion, argument, whatever you want to call it, about different approaches to something. So if we were now in a virtual, augmented, or VR, whatever environment, how would we want to use that environment to help this discussion? We would probably want to put up, floating in space somewhere, an initial proposition, bits that are for and against that, and so on, right? To some extent. So my question.
This is called an argumentation map in visualization.
Yes.
It's one that a British philosopher named Stephen Toulmin originated in the 1980s and 90s. In the 1990s, I took the lead to take his simple little overnight classroom exercise assignments and make an industrial strength method out of argumentation mapping. It has now become a small subfield of philosophy and visualization and other things. That's what I would use.
No, absolutely. That's a good point, Bob. I'm just trying to be very not leading with the question, because I think this is close to what the guys have been working on. So I'm wondering what thoughts they have of how they want to build such a thing, or is that not really on the radar?
Well, there's been plenty of academic research on the subject. There's been.
There's a couple of.
Am I not answering the question? I'm sorry if I got the wrong question.
No. What I mean is looking at it from a specifically VR point of view, which I think has some different wrinkles. That's why I'm particularly wondering for the guys with the most experience in VR in how, from a very primitive point of view or an initial point of view, because okay, so the context for the question is, it's nice if we can build something together, but also I have to admit that if we did what I proposed earlier, once we have all the elements in VR space, I honestly really don't know what to do with them, which is kind of fascinating. So yeah, I see you have your hand up, Fabian.
So the moving things around, to me, I always think of post-it notes, but it doesn't really matter, like a set of a small chunk of text, let's say, or chunks of text. To be honest, to me, that's trivial. It's pretty much solved. And among us, we've shown like maybe a dozen or more ways, and I'm sure even more actually from the past. The challenge there is capturing new ideas on the spot, because we don't have convenient access to a keyboard or an input method. I want to say keyboard, but an input method that allows that. And there are, we already discussed about it a bit before, but the different trade-off, like, okay, you can use keyboard, but you need to find it. And then maybe eventually like sit down to find it, or you can use speech recognition, but then if you use abbreviations or words that are less common, it's harder, maybe noise. I mean, there are a lot of different ways, but they're all problematic. And another one is a compromise where some of us are in VR and the others are not. But honestly, I imagine very few of us feel like, how do you say, doing secretarial work. Like, we know it's important, but at some point we want to be part of the creative action, say, oh, that might be a solution. And usually I found that challenging, that capturing at the speed of thought is hard. It usually doesn't go at the same pace. So it's not a solution, it's more of a problem I have, that I find manipulating, moving around, and even saving useful. It's not even hard. I think we know how to do that. But how to get that one new idea while being in the space, while keeping the pace of thinking and problem solving, to me, that's still an open question. I don't really know how to do that.
So I'm gonna try to restate the question that I heard. And the question is, how would we how in virtual, the context is virtual reality. The context is virtual reality advanced a considerable farther than it is right now by this group and others. And so within that context, how would we advance the ability of humanity to have very complex discussions about claims which they differ on? Is that the question?
Yeah, and I think I have actually a tentative answer. So one of the things that is really nice about speech like this is that it's very easy for people to create and invoke things. Something that we do informally is add things to the chat as the sort of tabling sort of components that deserve to be a little bit more persistent. I think one of the things that I would be very, very interested in is a more continuous and sliding scale for the ability to create and invoke artifacts that we can kind of put in place. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with a friend last night. I was kind of sick of the fact that he does pretty pointless things with his electronics tinkering. And so I said to him, rather than complaining about that, I said, what are the 5 most interesting things you find about fabrication and electronics? And so he listed those. This was in the chat. And so I kind of put them in my head, sort of up as specific points to look at, and then send, like, looking across the things that he's done, what does he like most about those, and what are the challenges that he thinks are most interesting to address in terms of getting better at it. And so to that end, having this capacity to have something that is something like conversation, but also something like diagramming as well, where you have the capacity for evanescent speech and utterances, things that you say and then they go away. But then you also have fairly seamlessly the ability to literally capture speech and words as they come out, that you can then kind of position in a persistent space. And I think that would be very interesting from the perspective of, being able to create these things, position them, and link them. That would give you the ability to do the argumentation theory. It's basically, I haven't seen whether Noda provides a multiplayer mode, but essentially that would be the least worst start that I can imagine. I'm not aware of other platforms or applications that have the functionality of Noda. I haven't actually used it for anything seriously because I haven't bought the voice recognition component to be able to have unlimited speech input. Something that I have written for myself so far is the ability to do speech recording in Quest and positioning those in space. I'm not sure if I've shared a link to that. What I need to do is make use of a system that goes between my computer and my Quest, such that it's able to ferry over the speech recognition for free into that shared sort of application space. But at such time as you have the ability for one person to connect via their VR headset and their Quest, as well as, say, AirPods on their computer, then it shouldn't be challenging to be able to ferry that content to multiple participants and have multiple people doing those things, so that you may have to have 2 computers per person, their virtual reality headset and their thing that is responsible for doing speech recognition. That's until I can convince the people who make Quest browser to actually enable that speech recognition at that level in the browser, because I think that hopefully the value of it will become clear as people start to make more use of it. But yeah, so to that end, having the ability to place things at the speed of, if not thought, then of performance, I think is a valuable thing. Having the ability for those to become semantically relevant in the context of a conversation. So you may have an argumentation mapping mode that you have shorthands for being able to create the linkages of the kind that Toolmin indicates. It looks like there's a limited grammar of what things can be what to which other things, and as long as you have something that can be conformant to those, then you have the space to argue and refer back to the components of that argument.
Noda is pretty good. I have the full version of it, and I was surprised when I started labeling things randomly because I said things. So it does work quite well for a normal vocabulary. But my problem with it is that it's very shape and color based, the nodes. They're not really interesting information objects. So it's a great feeling walking around it, but also on the notion of speed of adding new ideas and interaction. I do think this is one of the reasons it's so important to have the hybrid VR and normal work, so that I know, Fabian, this is partly what you were talking about is, I want to be able to sit down and do things on my laptop, press a button, and that is now in the VR space if I need to, to have that back and forth. Mark?
I just thought in listening to Brandel just now, and you were talking about, the fact that whilst there are limitations broadly, speech capture and transcription is getting pretty good. And this idea you're saying, well, some things are evanescent and just roll away, essentially that roll off on the transcript. But if one was able to effectively pinch onto, take something from the transcript, and the act of basically copying it from the transcript, which otherwise is lost in after some time a buffer, perhaps as then an object that you may then apply more information and, but in whatever means, whether it's a sort of, visual structuring or whether you just metadata of some kind. But the point, this is in other words, moving it from the evanescent stream to a persistent object that you may then refer to. Just a passing thought, and I have no idea how practical that is, but that's sort of an echo that I took from what was being described.
So
yeah, and
oh yeah, sorry. No, Brandel, go on, and then Fabian.
Well, that's one of the things that I was most impressed by in terms of the function of it in word reality, is the way that I had this visual word search automatically running on all utterances at all times. And the neat thing about that was that it created that evanescent panel of image results that you could pluck from. So you knew it was there. It was actually out of one's own field of view, so it wasn't distracting, but present, such that if you had the desire to find something to encode and to represent that, it's a little trickier in multiplayer in the sense that you may need to have text under people, and you also may want to, like you personally may want to extract someone else's word and pull that out of the stream and say, hang on, this is something I want to refer to. And so, yeah.
So what I understand you're talking about, without having actually seen what it is that is a kind of hyper index that is dynamic, is created second by second. Is that right?
Yeah. So I guess by virtue of us speaking here, if this was happening in a more immersive context, although it's not by necessity that it has to be virtual reality, I think these capabilities could occur here if, for example, the transcript was being automatically generated, and if you are in an application like Illustrator, or there's effectively a multiplayer Illustrator program called Figma. I'm not sure if you've seen that, Bob. It's neat. You get to see other people's cursors as well as your own, and you can sort of contribute multiply to a document. But if you had so this Figma, if I can send the link in the thing. But yeah, having the ability to identify the things that you want to hold on to and place into a document as a consequence of those things coming up. I mean, it's very similar to the concept of that was powering, at least my impression of Google Wave, that recognition that there isn't a substantial difference in kind, but only in degree, between chats and emails and documents. Which does anybody know Google Wave, or does everybody know Google Wave? Yes, that's right, Mark. Google Wave was a very exciting concept that Google had in about 2008, 2009, where they were exploring some sort of new concept for a way of storing, encoding information and communicating, where they said that there would be these waves, these things that were the same as web applications and chats and documents all at the same time. People would be able to put functionality into them. They would be able to take basically a chat log and turn that into a document or turn that into a page. Eventually, it turned out, for what I'm not sure in terms of the inside story of why it failed within Google, but my take on it is that it failed because it was too confusing to people what they were doing with the specific thing. There may have been technological aspects, but the reality is that we as human beings need anchors conceptually to whether what we're doing here is chatting or producing a document. And essentially the Overton window, what was thinkable about what a document wasn't there yet. And I presume there was some technical stuff, but that became the basis for the live editing, which, as I understand it, after NLS, was really the first earnestly and authentically live real-time system for multiple people to edit a document. So the work conceptually didn't go away, but it came back in a much more sort of obscure form, where it was in support of metaphors that we were more comfortable with and familiar with. Sorry, Fabian, I talked for ages.
No, no worries. And it's funny when you mentioned Google Web, it's like, no, I don't know, but yeah, I know. So way back when, and I don't know if it was technical. I think we were maybe. It's not a kind of tool for everyone. Not everyone is having either a deep conversation or deep conversation in a group, or wants to put the extra effort to curate, capture, and then curate, and then iterate. I mean, it's pretty demanding. So yeah, actually it puts some interesting questions. But I wanted to, what all this made me think of is also right now here we often talk about capturing and bringing it in and out of VR or even in the journal. And I'm wondering also at what point I have on my desktop open the API for Zoom because we rely on Zoom. And I don't know how usable that is. There are other platforms like Jitsi, there are plenty of other video platforms that have different capabilities. And I'm wondering if that's also one of the bottleneck that we're relying on platforms that don't give us enough control in order to bridge directly to maybe not necessarily a VR space, but a space, and then a space that we can, because it's one thing to be able to pop the headset in and out. Now with the Quest, it's relatively trivial, and we can send it a URL quite easily, but then it still requires us to prepare the space with the information. And I'm wondering how much the platform we choose to have the conversation right now is limiting our ability to bridge and connect, to have better or similar conversation in VR.
I got my hand up. Right. So Zoom is fine. We've had over 100 meetings recorded since we started last year. It's not brilliant, absolutely not. But one of the key things, and Alan, welcome to kind of a bit of a review. We're talking about first, yes, we can take a PDF with Visual Meta into VR and extract. Fabian has built that, it's fantastic. Then I've looked with Brandel about taking a native author document called the .liquid document, because in there we have lots of JSON for each individual type of metadata already beautifully laid out. So could we then, Brandel has taken that into VR. You do the map in author, and then you open it up in VR and it's 3D, obviously starts out flat, but all the relationships, everything is there. So that was the origin of one discussion. Then this, what we got into now is, that is what I think. So that is kind of like my index card floating above everybody. It's my proposal. So then there's going to be pros and cons. So we're talking about how VR could help us resolve a direction forward. But I really do feel strongly, Fabienne, that living only in VR for the general public is not going to work. I really think whatever is in VR has to go in and out. And I know that not everything can, but I just think that if we can have if we can keep using Zoom to record our audio, but if we soon at some point end up all having our Oculuses on in the meeting and we're looking through the web at shared objects, that would be a really great step forward. But I just think we need a base. I don't care. I mean, if everybody's okay with another platform, we'll just switch. Doesn't make any difference. But I think this is just audio with a couple of smiles. I think we really need to look at how we can put things into a VR environment properly.
So to clarify, I did not mean to spend all our times in VR, but rather questioning what are the limits of the current workflow in order to be VR ready, if you want, or to have a workspace that will carry those conversations to VR. Because I think otherwise what happens is if I have to think about everything I have to prepare in order to make a meeting in VR, then I want to give up because it's going to be pretty tricky. I'm going to forget some of the limitation, etc. So and it's not a criticism that how we can bring the content, but maybe right now having the journal is sufficient. I'm just saying it as I think that and maybe also the maybe here one bridge is potentially to have the video there now are available on YouTube after the fact, or where are they stored?
Yes.
Yeah, in YouTube. So it also means that's one way. Like we already have a repository of video that can be that are time coded, that can be watched in VR. I imagine maybe the Zoom meeting could be live streamed to VR, and could be also somebody, if some of us want to be in VR to watch and participate, that might be feasible. And eventually side by side the video recording of the streaming, and then the past video recording, and then next to them the transcript, and then next to them visually linking when they are used in the journal. That could be a well, so that without changing any of the quote-unquote infrastructure that is already working now, how to have a workspace in VR that keeps on being updated. And again, not to say it's mandatory or even a good idea, but that it's a live platform that can get the content as we produce it.
I think sorry, Alan, I'll give you the mic just in a second. On these specific points, I don't think we obviously need to save everything, and the Google Wave issue I think is quite useful here, because we are operating in different temporal spaces, you know, whether it's email or our meetings when we're together. My feeling, and I'm not answering you, but I just want to be really, really clear, is that if during the week, we all have different ways of working, but I will, oh my God, this is going to solve everything. I write it down, you know, and then I share it with you guys, and some of you read it, some of you don't, which is absolutely fine. Same here, but that's the way it is. I then want to be able to put that bit of a statement into a space that we can then share, go in and out of. And, you know, we can build this real knowledge base, because it's easy to think of it in general terms, but you guys have been there quite a lot, know how incredibly not real it is yet. And one of the key issues, and this is what Brandel and I was talking about earlier in the week, is if you just take a normal document into VR, break it up, put things around, you then have to record, obviously, where those pieces are, if you're going to go into 2D and then back out. But if you then, let's say, follow a reference, and you grab that thing and you place the reference document here, you're also going to have to store somehow that now there's a second document and where that is. And then, of course, there's the issue of where is it in the room? Is it on this side or is it on that side of me when I open it up? And that's, as Brandel has explained to me, isn't known by VR yet because the environment and the items have to be separate. So one of the great concerns here, for me at least, is I want to be able to focus on the laptop for one kind of work, for that kind of medium. Then I want to be able to see relationships with you guys somehow shared. Audio doesn't matter as much yet, because that can be via Zoom or whatever. But then if you make a change to something, that somehow needs to be recorded in a way that we own it, not just for intellectual property or privacy, but so we can then open it up again in the future. Not that it's only in that room. Hi, Alan. No, long time, no Brooklyn.
Yeah. I trust you all recognize the much better camera quality I have now. I have a new computer out of necessity from the other computer freaking out nonstop. But happy to be back. And I do have a lot to catch up on. Based on what I just heard, I want to try and connect the dots from what I was understanding before. So humor me, if you will. The real struggle with the Zoom calls that we have is not that we have them, not that they're recorded, but that it's difficult to extract information from them, and that there are moments of relevance that either would be really nice to capture and put into a journal, or moments that deal specifically with some form of research or a new idea, and it's just very hard to unpack them. All right, so I can understand that being the motivation for doing this in VR, but that problem would still persist in VR, just like you mentioned, Frode. I mean, they would still have to take all the effort to create artifacts and put them in spaces so we could interact with them. So my thought then is there a way we could try and solve this in 2D first, even just for the small case of not solving the problem, but solving our problem of Monday, Friday meetings, right? And in my mind, a not perfect solution, but a step in the right direction would be if we met in a Miro space or a mural space or any of these other tools that are part of the way there. Then we could sort of live in and have embodied experience of what it's like to move ideas around while we're talking about them. And I think that would transition over to what a VR experience could feel like, or it would inform it somehow. So those are thoughts.
Okay, so really useful. Mark and I had a meeting right before this, and we've met a few times talking about the journal. And I don't want to suddenly go back to, oh, it's all about the journal, which can be really annoying. But the benefit of the journal is it's a monthly statement of our productions. So there are the two parts of the journal logically. One part is every single meeting is transcribed and put up on the websites. So if we ever need to scrape, it is all there. The journal has human transcribed the guest speakers, and then it has articles. I've written a few. You're all very welcome to write what you want. Plus, we are having more and more guest people writing. They're just like the Future of Text book. And then there's the complicated bit, which is when I see you guys say something useful on Twitter, for instance. Oh yeah, sorry, Mark, that's another point. When you said A, I thought you meant Alan. As in I should highlight for Alan, but it's just document A. Right, so for instance, Brandel and Adam have been building stuff, posting in our chat on Twitter, and I try to turn it into a journal article. It's a bit hokey, but it's okay. So I think that the term that came up in this discussion, I can't remember the term, but the whole thing of not everything needs to be recorded, not everything needs to be highlighted, right? But if we build the means, I call it documents. You can call it index cards, nodes, whatever, things. If we just have the means to create a thing and put it in a space and discuss relationships, I think we're almost halfway there. But I do think that VR offers something very, very different from 2D. I would have agreed with you a few months ago, Alan, of, can we try to solve a lot of it in 2D? But it's so experientially different. I don't think it necessarily translates. So that's why I'm.
Yeah,
Before
fair.
you come in, so I was just saying, like,
I don't think it necessarily translates. Who knows? You can't, you know,
Yeah.
that's speculation.
Right. Well, so
no, I don't mean it like that. I don't. What I mean, Bob, is that, you know, you write a book and you go see the movie. Oh, it didn't live up to expectations. VR is a completely different medium than 2D. It really is this difference between a book and a movie. It isn't just 2D straightened out. It isn't. Second Life isn't VR. Yes, Brandon.
Well, so Frode, I don't think that the claim is that one would get everything. Yeah. So to that, I think sounds like I'm speaking for everybody at this point, but what I don't think Alan is saying that it is the same as, but that we can get something about the nature of that interaction from this one. It's that we can get more than nothing by carrying on one of these meetings in the context of a Miro board or a Figma document or a mural things. These are all essentially just Illustrator but multiplayer, with their emphasis on various aspects of it, Bob. Miro is sort of prioritizes the idea of things that look like sticky notes, whereas Figma is a little bit more. It has a pen tool and the ability to draw lines and things like that. And so they're all tools for more or less this. What they don't have is the automatic creation and reconciliation of the chat stream to the creation of those artifacts, but that's still a much simpler thing to incorporate by just sort of identifying a phrase as it comes past and typing it down. So I think that it would be very interesting to do that, to literally structure a conversation by not being in here, but being like having this provide that audio substrate, but then actually all meeting together in a Miro board next time. And see what we do, what we create as a consequence of talking about different things and putting them into the record effectively. While we were talking about this, I was also very intrigued by the idea of being able to consume something like the YouTube video of this and turning that spatial, you know, because you then have whatever ability for offline processing you need. And so you could take this grid of 6 windows, that's the way I'm looking at it right now, and peel those off into 6 people, 6 panels in space, and have the transcript, which also exists by virtue of the YouTube video, underneath each of those people as it turns up. So by virtue of the green square, and the time codes and the speech, you'd be able to put those things there. Then you'd also have the, you know, so it's a video player, but it's one which is opinionated about what you're expecting to get out of the video. You know, you're able to pull words out and put them into your space, and then those are linked to those times as well as to that person, and then you might be able to create cross links by having those things. Relating times to other times and speech to other speech within it. I think that's really, really interesting in terms of the, not just this interaction, this literal like set of people and this venue, but just the recognition that there is an increasing amount of discourse conducted in this way, that you can take that view of an opinionated video player for the purposes of, you know, like what is the, I love to say, what is the Photoshop of writing? But this is, what is the Photoshop of watching YouTube? And how do you, what do you gain from it, and what can you intend to do? And that will be fun.
I think we're looking at very different things to augment. The discussion we had on Monday, Brandel, I thought was one of the best, because there was only 3 people, so it was very focused, and you said a lot of new stuff that I haven't actually heard. So that, to me, that one is worth reading the transcript, but most of this talk is just not interesting for anyone ever, apart from you know, historians in the future if we have a breakthrough. So that's why I think the kind of knowledge objects that we think are important, whether you call them document or notes or whatever, as I said earlier, is really, really key. It's not just capturing our interactions, I think that is a really important fundament, really important thing. But, if we, like in the chat here, Alan just told me what he's about to talk about, idea from implementation hack. That's a worthwhile thing. My waffle now isn't actually that interesting. So maybe it's because of my focus on text and so on. So I think if we just talk about the journal for a moment, currently the journal is quite traditional. But if we look at the idea that every month we have to produce an artifact that is a statement, it has links to the entire underlying dialogue, fine. But we have someone wrote an article, someone replied, and here was a dialogue back and forth. Maybe we get closer to an idea how to carry on the conversation. But Alan, please, over to you.
Yeah, and the journal and newsletter is still something that I'm very interested in. I've got work on that to share. So yeah, I still want to be a part of that conversation. Regarding the implementation idea and the sort of the Miro approach, and perhaps it's not Miro, perhaps it's something else, but what's useful about this is scoping the value of the conversation. That's where hacks can open up, right? Like we can just have immediate quick fixes. So Randall, you with the timestamp idea and the cross-referencing, I think that's going in the right direction. Another could be, what if we had a different Miro board for each week, right? So like a week shares, if there's 2 meetings a week, it's going to be one Miro board, right? Well, then it's a question of what happens when we refer to something that's from a previous Miro board or meeting, or maybe it's 3 meetings, who knows? Maybe it's all in one, but at some point that's going to get really messy and it's nice to start over. So I was thinking a hack could be, along with the timestamps and visuals of the video going on, you could take a screenshot of a portion of the spatial area, be it in Miro, wherever, and just paste that screenshot into the new area, right? So it's dead, the links don't work, right? But you at least have a hacky, poor man's way of referencing, this is the things that we were thinking about at that time, and I'm abstractly referencing that moment in time from before. Those kinds of games seem like they could become possible, and that's exactly the spirit I think that could transition into a VR or AR or all of those other spaces that still have kind of some technical hurdles as opposed to a flat limited 2D version.
Yeah, no, I buy that. One of the things, I don't know if you've ever played the video game Fantastic Contraption. It was a play on The Incredible Machine. They made it was a Flash version, but they also made a VR version. And one of the really, really fun things about that was that there's a level select sort of underworld. It's made to be sort of like a Greek underworld-ish sort of place. But one of the neat things it does is stores all of your, so you create a construction, and it's human scale. So they'll often be, at or above head height as you're sort of trying to build a trebuchet or whatever. And there's an array of sort of terrain obstacles and whatever else you need to have. And so that's, the size of or larger than the room that you're in as you're constructing them. The level select has those each as sort of little about the size of a gold ingot, so that you can see the detail on them, but it's just a vastly, vastly different scale. And what I love about that is the way that it makes functional use of such astonishingly disparate scales for the representation of this same artifact that you yourself were a party to creating. And so that it has that familiarity, but it's just intensely miniaturized in the same way that an architectural miniature might be. And so it's neat because it means that it does the job of telling you what it is, but it's and to some extent, that those details can be retained, maybe in full, or maybe in a simplified form, but it gives you reference to the things in it so that you can.
That brings up the other hack. I'll just jump this in real quick and then. But yeah, the other opportunity is that knowing if we had rules for the space, right, the terrain for these meetings, then we could go in ahead of time and like start to create the terrain before the meeting, right? Hey, here's some things I've been working on or want to discuss, or just topics I've been thinking about. And so when we show up, it's already been sort of pre-populated. It's like, oh, someone messed up my space, but I bet we would see that it would guide the conversation and be pretty fun. That also, the Fantastic Contraption reminds me of this Canopy Club that I've been tinkering with, and it's really beautiful and playful, and a lot there that is useful to discuss at some time. Okay.
Sorry, Bob. Bob? Hi.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd support the Miro. I've certainly been a part of several different Miro discussions. Some were better than others because some of them were facilitated by experienced facilitators who knew what they were doing when they were trying to facilitate, and the group agreed that the facilitation was how it was going to be. I experienced this group, for example, as very creative, but jumping around in all sorts of directions all the time. And as a result, I don't particularly want to spend a lot of time in that kind of discussion. I don't have that kind of time in my life. I'm very I'm ecstatic about working with you on the stuff that starts out with some murals that I make in two-dimensional space. I'm ecstatic about working with that because I think that it has possibilities both in 2D and into virtual reality space. However, if we're jumping around all the time from one thing to another, we don't get very far. So I woke up this morning thinking, well, I'm going to decide that there's an hour of the 4 hours of this meeting that I'll attend. If people want to, if it wants, so I am not involved in the coding, all that coding kind of thing. And I find it, as brilliantly as Brandel described the last thing. I've forgotten the name of it. I couldn't quite imagine it, and 5 minutes went by. So what good was that? I don't even know the name of. I couldn't catch the name of it because that went by so fast. So there isn't, there are so many limitations which experienced facilitators know how to handle. And I'm not saying that I'm one, but I certainly have experienced a group. There's a group called Visual Facilitators, some of whom are really quite excellent. And they ask a group to focus on a particular topic for a particular amount of time, and gently try to exclude or ask people to not exclude,
Right,
and so forth. And I'm, that's where I'm at right now with this.
yeah, I see your hand up, Fabian, but just really briefly on Bob's point. I understand that not all of this is interesting to you. It's not interesting to everyone else either. There are many different groups, like people come and go. That's just the way this is. This is not a research project to do one thing. I would also like us to settle on something. I would like to have documents in and out of VR space. And that's some of the discussion earlier today. There's also a recurring theme of how to capture our meetings, which we're trying to deal with in different ways. But that is the nature of what this is. If you want to have maybe set up different meetings with some of the people who are willing to build the mural and only talk that, you're completely free to do that. It's because it is, it's difficult with these kind of volunteer communities to keep it together. It's difficult to have a specific project. We have different priorities. I think in and out of VR is absolutely crucial. I also think that going further with murals is absolutely crucial. I think that capturing our own dialogue is quite low on my priority list because the important bits we kind of write down anyway. But I'm very, very happy to support that work as well. Anyway, just as a comment, Fabienne, maybe.
I'll comment back and saying you just summarized 3 important subjects. It would be really helpful to say let's take these 3 subjects and let's devote the first half hour to that, the second half hour to that one, and the third half hour to that one, so at least there was some more coherence to the discussion.
Yeah, I would like to do that. We have tried something similar in the past. We had Fridays to be more on visual meta, Mondays to be more in general. That was one phase we went through, and we've tried other versions of it. But don't forget, we're dealing with, when it comes to VR, a whole new world. There are so many things that you put on the headset and it's like, oh my God, this is possible. And then you find out things that don't even exist. The shocking thing to me that I found out this week that Randall told me, the software thing that you have as object in a VR space is not actually allowed to know what space it's in, which is absolutely crazy. So there are all these limitations that are in the way of the way we think about it. So it is really difficult to chop it up. And, you know, we can try that going forward. Adam Wern didn't want talking about the journal, so he wanted only demo Monday and Fridays, but he hasn't been here for a couple of weeks. You know, and Brendan comes in when he, anyway, Fabienne, please.
I was wondering also, to be honest, to go back on those, let's say, 3 aspects. What's the best way? Is it to plan in advance and say, okay, or should it be a maximum amount of time per meeting, or not at all? I don't have an answer. Sometimes there are things to show or discuss, sometimes not. So there is definitely something to argue for the natural or the organic aspect to it. And if, yeah, I think I'd be fine if somebody would say, oh, I think next time we need to experiment with a whiteboard or Figma or something like this, and okay, that becomes the topic for the next one. And yes, not everybody would necessarily be interested or have something to contribute, but then they would be able to not come and come the following one. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'll briefly share my screen.
Hang on, Fabienne, before you share your screen, just really quickly. And also to you, Bob, we have actually started doing that, and I forgot to mention, we started with 1 monthly presentation, which is about that topic. Now we have 2. The one we had last Friday, he only had an hour, which turned out to be a bit of a blessing, because that goes exactly to what Fabienne and Bob are saying. We had 1 hour of a commercial company selling us their stuff in VR, which was useful to an extent, and then the other hour, he was not there. So to try to get towards what you're both saying, I completely wholeheartedly agree with. So we can do that via chat now or email or whatever. But Fabienne, please continue. And I'm glad you brought this up, Bob.
Yeah, so you'll tell me, please, when you can see my screen. Yeah, thank you. So that's Mozilla Hubs. And inside of it, you can see a screen. And what's a little bit special with that screen is from a virtual machine or a container. So it's not from my computer right here, it's from another one. And so the first question, let's say, what for? What's the point? And it goes back a bit to what we said a couple of times, like you put the headset and you don't have access to all the information you might want or need, and you might not also have on the headset enough power to do some of the processing you want. So that's the first step, is being able to provide back the information and eventually the computing power. And also because I think it's funnily enough, bringing a 2D space in a 3D space, or being able to move around in 6 degrees of freedom makes sense. But the other way around, again, you collapse everything through a plane. So that was that part. And also you can see a window there. It's very small, but my mouse or the mouse of the virtual machine is on the bottom right. And then I'm going to send a command here. There is a huge delay, I think 10 seconds. It's something I know how to fix, but I haven't got to that part yet. But normally, if everything goes well, the mouse pointer is going to move to the top left of the virtual screen or the virtual machine. And that's just to illustrate that it's both ways. The communication goes both ways. From the display of the virtual machine. No, I made a typo. Sorry about that. So I connect to the virtual machine, and then I store the command. Of course, I'm just showing you there as a demonstration, but you would not type in VR, you would use the controllers. And one of the action to do this would be, you can see the controller, I hope now it moved on the top left corner. It's very small, but it shows that it does work. And the point is that instead of typing that command, you would take your controller, move it around, and also punch through, let's say, the 2D screen in order to get whatever you want from the virtual machine. Could be a PDF with its metadata, could be a GLTF or a 3D model, and then you grab it out in the virtual space. So to try to make that connection between a flat 2D machine to the VR space. Voila.
How do you no, what? Don't stop sharing. How did you actually do that? How would you send something from the screen in that space? I saw the back and forth communication, but let's say you're looking at a 2D version of a mural in that screen, and now you want to extract it. How would you do that? How would the actual data of the mural get into the 3D space?
So one of the tool I use is called x.tool, and it's a way to control the pointer remotely. And you can get information on the current window, or you can manipulate the window on the desktop to either move them around or to get information like what's the title of that window. So there are some things that are easy to get, like I said, title of the window, size of the window. But the thing is, once you have the size of the window, you can take a screenshot and then crop it to the size of that window. So you would have a 2D representation of it. And if it, for some application like the browser, what I can do is I can get the URL of the open tab. And if you get the URL of the open tab, then you're going to take the content from that URL and then inject it back in the VR space. And it links back to the, let's say, the visual metadata extraction is if you have a visual meta PDF with a publicly available URL, then you could say, okay, I get the content and the metadata from it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Mark?
Just some, if anyone wants to respond, anyone question to what Fabian was going to say, I'm happy to sort of go next. Otherwise, I've got just a couple of general things to throw in. So if there isn't any meeting on that, just a couple of things to say. Now I was away on leave basically for about a week and a half. So sorry for phasing out slightly. Now I'm back. I'm planning to get a Noda subscription so I can do upload. And I'm planning to do some simple tests by taking part of the ACM dataset because it's a publicly available dataset and just putting the citation thing in there and just, well, basically seeing, does it break the whole thing? Does it even look sensible? And if anyone has anything they'd like me to do in that regard or particular aspects of the data, let me know. And the other thing is, it's lovely to see the work that Brandon's done with taking Bob's mural. If there's anything I can do to help on the data side, I've got no 3D programming smarts, but I am used to data munging. So if there's some sort of grunt work to do just to get some of the digital bits and bobs in the right place so that we can do the interesting stuff in 3D, again, let me know. I'm very happy to help with that. Oh, and I'm working on the journal with Freud, and I may actually correspond directly with Alan and Raphael, just as a fresh pair of eyes, looking about how whether it's informative enough for the outreach needs that they've got. So, I mean, that's a bit far away from the 3D aspects, the VR aspects, but is pertinent to the group as a whole. Okay, thanks.
Bob.
I just wanted to say two things. One is that apart from what I have said before about facilitation, I'm amazed and appreciative and that Frode has been able to keep us together for 10 years. That's an amazing accomplishment for any facilitator.
Not all of you, but thank you nevertheless.
But no, I really appreciate it. I'm trying to learn from it. I guess the second thing is that Mark, I may very well, one of the questions, both for 2D and for 3D or virtual, whichever I call it, sometimes 3D, is what you just said: how to update vast amounts of data and then be able to compare. One of the most elementary mental functions is our ability to compare things. We need to be able to compare, and it's, I've made a bunch of structures at particular times, mostly during the 2000s and 2010s, which could be and need to be updated. They're vital in the sense of they have to do with maybe you've heard about it, climate change, or maybe you've heard about it, sustainability, or maybe you've heard about it, nuclear weapons. So any help along those kind of lines, just as a demo or as a real project that I might be working on in those areas, would be of great help. Thank you very much for the time.
I think I have something for us, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate your earlier urging, is just putting it in the chat as well. So I think the journal can be important for us because it's a real piece of thing. I'm not saying the rest of the world cares yet, but it's a real piece of thing, right? So if we consider that the journal can be a mural, right? We should be able to fold it out at least. And this is not in any way to
Sure. Very happy to have any mural put in the journal.
Okay, so I was just reading Brandel's comments. This is real quick what I'm saying, but also imagine if we decide to focus on reading the journal in a VR space, while it's also a physical artifact, as in it can be printed or normal digital. In that we can also have timeline, right? Easily. So if we just make it left to right, here is everything. We can then split the mural. Of course, we'll rethink it a million times, but imagine the bottom bit is just video that you click on to watch, whatever it might be. Then you have a higher level, which are the articles we've published. So we just start with having a normal document that can be spread out in VR, and then we can add incredible interactions to it. How does that sound to, I see some shaking in California. How is it shaking in Europe, Fabian?
I demand to see.
What's that?
I demand to see. It's to go back quickly that's why we need to try stuff. There are things that seem very evident and trivial and fun, and then in the end they were a bit like overkill. So here I don't have an opinion until I can give it a go.
Okay, so on that note, what Mark and I was doing earlier with our closed loop of author and reader was what to put where and stuff. And a very, are you going, Brenda?
There's a thing in our second hour on Fridays that overlaps with something that I've been meaning to get to. I would like to be able to get to it, but yeah, not out of disinterest with what's going on here, but I just
Oh, no,
not a
that's
community I
fine.
want to
That's
be part
fine.
of.
Look forward to seeing you on Monday, and yeah, so okay. Right, so the thing is, in an author document, as you probably know, you can select, in a visual meta, you can select text, copy and go to author, paste, and it's pasted as a full citation. That's very relevant to this, because in the journal, different people will have written different sections, not just the owner, author, of the editor of the document. So what we do is, Fabian, for instance, the bits that you have written, the heading that is the heading of your bit. The way it works is you command click in author, click see more, and then you can add an author name. So that means that this section is now tagged with Fabian. So when we then export to PDF, that is encoded in visual meta, which means that if someone copies text below that heading and pastes it to cite it, it is your name who is the author, not Mark or me, who is the editor, right? So that means that we are encoding that kind of useful stuff. Now, if we're going to make the journal readable in VR, especially on a timeline, then we may want to add time data to it. We don't currently have that. And the question is when it would be useful. Additionally, all the transcripts are, well, the one with the guest speaker, you know, is human, the other ones are machine. They are all in a different journal document, so we have all that. So for you to have access to that, where we have the speaker name, it sometimes will be an error, but they are at least there. So all that data is available.
For me, just to answer a little bit on that, it's not so much that we have a linear set of sentences that I said something after you said something, and you said something after I said something, which is what a journal is, but that we try to, and you've done this from time to time in your summaries, to make some organization and structure, some clustering of items, some layering. Perhaps there's a coding layer, and there's an organization layer, and there's a presentation layer, and so there are a bunch of those kind of things that would that I find help structure both conversations and are essential for murals, or any kind of visualization. So that's the functionality that I find is missing in the just sequential timeline discussion format. Although using the timeline from, for example, if we had a list of problems, right? Imagine this: we have a list or a display or a network of the problems that exist today of getting important structuring into virtual reality. Imagine what that would, if you can imagine what that would look like. How would we get, how would we organize that? Because there might be 100 problems, and 100 problems just with lines connecting them doesn't help people very much. You have to be able to cluster them. You have to be able maybe to organize them occasionally by time, or maybe some of the clusters by time, and so forth. That's the elementary sort of stuff in visual organization, anyway, that I've found. And there is, there could be a whole set of problems of how do we take even what is among the best in visual murals, let's say, and and how, what are the problems of actually bringing it into virtual reality, actually identifying, actually naming them and giving examples of them. And once we have the names and examples, not the discussion, not the long journal of it, but the actual network or list of those problems identified, named, and exampled, then we can do something with them, and we can talk about them better.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
my experience in life. That's my experience in life. Let's put it that way. In at least in working with very, very complex subjects.
yeah.
Team.
Thanks, Bob. Mark, just to reply to Bob, the thing is, the problem is also the solution, because we have Fabian, Adam, and Brandel. They are the three people who actually make things. So if they don't want to make things, things don't get made, right? Because they are Mark and I can make a journal. We can certainly, all of us in different ways, contribute to the workload. But when it comes to the specific of this, it is so important that they're happy. So I'm trying to change the environment for that. I saw that Brandel is not too fussed about what the focus is. And I think I know a little bit more about Adam's focus. But for instance, Fabian, you do have a day job. This is you hanging out, just wasting time with some people. So I think it is very important that we all understand each other's priorities. And I think your priority and ours is not entirely aligned, not in terms of the result, but in terms of how to go about it. And I think that's absolutely fine. But do you want to talk maybe more about what would make you bother continue to be still part of this group, to put it as a basic question like that?
So what gets me going is to think better and freer. Like, I want to be able to build more stuff, because that stuff is usually tools, and those tools help me to think. So it's a very utilitarian perspective, let's say. And I think I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago that why I usually like also when there is content, let's say the murals or the journal, is because it crystallized toward a need, because otherwise it can be a bit abstract or generic. And even though that's intellectually pleasant, when there is too much freedom, also you can't do much. You just get lost into anything, and it's not that productive. So what gets me going is something that is going, I can see far now that it's going to be useful somehow, but it's not immediate. And I remember we had a brief discussion about let's say a more generic audience, or make it easy to access and make it anybody could use it. To me, that's not interesting, because that usually goes at odds with being able to think further where nobody has thought before. Kind of, that's the desire. It doesn't mean that it should never translate to that. And if it can help the most amount of people, I of course prefer this. But to me, that comes in a second stage at a later time, transforming from early on prototypes or proof of concept to an actual tool for others to use. But yeah, to be very direct, as long as I have interesting discussion and can learn from ideas, criticism, feedback, or even documents to read, I'll come back and build more on a super pragmatic viewpoint. There are two reasons that make me build stuff. It's I'm interested in it, and I bet that the outcome will reward the work. Like, I start to code on something, and that somehow using the tool that's going to be produced is going to bring some return of investment, intellectually speaking, and getting paid for it. But I also don't get paid to do stuff I don't believe in. So it's usually aligned.
Yeah, that was very useful. And Mark, thank you for your patience.
No, I'm just going to reflect on the fact and sort of going back to, in fact, perhaps something for Fabian, is just the fact that, I mean, actually usefully, Fred and I had a full and frank discussion about completely unnecessary aspects of visual styling in PDF, because the thing I'm really reflecting on from earlier today and then this conversation now is actually how actually constraints can help us, because what I'm really thinking about, and now we're talking about maybe, can we take the stuff in the journal and put it, say, into a VR space? So I'm thinking, well, okay, so how does this, almost the content of each individual piece becomes incidental? That we sort of know how to write that bit of text. The fun part is, how do we provide the extra metadata bits and pieces so that, Fabienne and Brendel and Adam can do the cleverness that we're seeing in the 3D space, on the virtual space. But we can also sort of track it back to more traditional means which are where lots of people's sort of headspace is at the moment. And indeed, to what Bob alluded to, is the fact that, yes, we're going to need to update stuff, or even if that's only to link this one with the previous one. So essentially, and part of this is building the step we're standing on, which always means it gets exciting because you're always missing a bit of the solution. But that's why, as I keep saying, I'm quite happy to get stuck into some of the mundane data stuff, because it's the abstraction layer that lies behind what you see on the screen of a PDF or a piece of paper, or what we eventually render. Sadly, underneath it's all data, and I don't claim to have any special expertise there, but I guess I get less easily jaded than others in considering that. And I suppose, interestingly too, I do it not coming from an engineering background, but more from an information background. So I'm less worried about the sort of engineering, that sort of formal standard side. Is, does it make sense? Does it get us to where we're going? So I'm very much down with the demo concept in that sense. What's important is you have a usable, understandable outcome. If it has to be done in a slightly strange way, doesn't bother me. An element of pragmatism is always needed.
Yeah, I mean, the reason this journal issue is delayed is because the guy doing the transcription is in Poland, so he's been too busy with the Ukrainian situation. He's almost done, and of course that's important. One of my close friends left this morning with a van full of things that we all got together to go across to Poland, both to drop off and to pick up family members. So, climate change is probably the most important thing in the world, with maybe the exception of Putin shelling nuclear power stations. At some point we have to kind of ignore it and get on with other things. And of course, this community is based on one thing. We want to help people think and communicate. Okay, two things. So I think that we are at a point where we can do something useful. And I want to bridge the gap between demo and reality. That's what I really want to do. Because, okay, I come from I have an artistic background. I couldn't code or do serious maths to save my life, quite literally. So I come from that part of the world mentally, and my imagination is very good. It's the one thing I know is good, but I do know that even my imagination is very much limited by experience, because to build this castle in the cloud is completely bloody useless. So what I feel here is this thing about imagination. Virtual reality offers an augmentation dimension that is so far beyond what we can understand without the things on our heads. So I really, really want us to build a thing which I can show, first of all, to Vint Cerf, who's so supportive of this work in general, where he can say, I get VR now. We need this to work together. And, we've been going in lots of circles with a lot of creative people in different ways, but I do agree with Bob coming in here as the grand senior, who has been around the block many times and saying, it's time to do something useful. So I guess we will follow the advice on having different discussions. There's only 4 of us now. We should probably plan what to talk about on Monday, to have an agreement on that, and maybe even next Friday. And then I really think, you know, I'm a seriously opinionated person. Of course, I'm trying to be like a facilitator, but I have my opinions, as all of you do. But I'm very willing to bend a lot for us to build a thing that can help other people understand why we think this is so important.
Well, I'll say, first of all, I just want to, I was wondering how you got the transcription made for the journal, because there are, you know, you've got somebody does that rather than there's an automatic.
It depends. It depends. The normal meetings like we have today, I use a service called Sonix. I'll give you the URL.
SONIX?
It's sonix.ai. That's quite good because it recognizes people's voices. But what's annoying is that when people come in late, then it doesn't seem like the algorithm tends to understand them properly. So then at the end, that'll be someone else's voice and a bit of cleaning. The specific meeting we have with guest presenters, we have a wonderful human, Danilo, who does to make sure that they're well done.
Good.
Well, Fred's put the Sonix in the sidebar for you.
Right. Yeah. You know, I will look for that in chat. Although I hardly ever read chat because I try to pay attention to what people are saying, or if it's, as I say, if it's things that I don't will never understand, I tune out. I do appreciate your offer to do this, you know, happy to have to work a little bit with you on the on what kind of an agenda to have and to ask, because it will require, you know, maybe something doing something fairly uncomfortable, which is to ask people not to talk about certain things for a period of time.
Yeah, that's doesn't go down well. Doesn't go down well. You're right.
Well, there are, you know, one of the things that I've noticed that a skilled facilitator does is saying, that's really important topic, and I've written it down over here on the next topics that we're going to deal with in the future.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to the topic that we're talking about, for example.
Exactly. So a couple of things. First of all, request to you, Fabian, if you could please, either to me or the group, write a sentence or paragraph of, within the kind of stuff we've talked about, what you would actually want to work on. Key to share that with Brandel and Adam to see if they share enthusiasm. And if they don't, maybe we do different. But, you know, this is where we have to be, even though we haven't met all of us, just open and close friends and say, I want this. And if that doesn't work, we try to modify it both sides, you know, but let's just be at least very, 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 very honest, because we are trying to do the same thing in the end, right?
Well,
and then,
you know, I will do that. I will do that also, because what I would, you know, I can say what I want. I think the next step for, you know, having to do with murals, the mural stuff, is to continue to build a demonstration of the connections that could be made out of, I believe the Vision 2050 mural is probably one of the better ones, because I've got quite a bunch of things that could be connected to it, thought about, even updated if Mark was interested, and so forth.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
It's going to be the demo subject, and I'm willing to work with people if people want to do that in virtual reality, or, and in my view, we would have to do some of it in 2D right now, just to do sketches and ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Fabian?
Yeah, it's a quick note on one of the beauty and peril of prototyping and proof of concept and all that is if you're genuine about it, you can't project too far because you really don't know if it's feasible or not, or if it's going to make sense or not. So I'm not trying to justify my lack of planning, or maybe, you know, trying to act like a bee going from one flower to another or whatever. It's because I generally can't plan, because I don't know what's going to work or not. Sometimes it looks trivial and I think, oh, it's going to be an hour and boom, it's done. And years later, that's why I take notes, to be honest. It's because ahead of time, I have I don't want to say no idea, but it's really hard to predict. And sometimes it's the opposite. I thought, oh, it's going to take me months and I don't know. So I'm still going to do to try to plan a bit and to define what I buy, at least what I believe is interesting and should be explored. But I'm just sharing the perspective that it's very different to produce software that exists or has been done in some way before, and something that is at the fringe or at the edge, or what's actually new, because maybe it's also feasible but pointless, and then it's pointless to think of the steps ahead because we're just not going to go there.
What is interesting to know, and because it's something that probably you sort of park in a different part of the brain when you're doing stuff, is it's a sort of simple thing. Just the information you're working with, if it doesn't have things that you need in the sense of, you know, if only it had this structure in it, I could do more. It's really interesting to know, because it's not a problem I think it's useful for you to solve because you're doing other things, but in the round it's something we may be able to assist with. Or, you know, if I just had something, you know, this long structured in this way, and I sort of well know that these things, you're lucky if you trip over them. So one of the whole things, a bit like the ACM stuff, which let Adam do his sort of visualizations, was just sensing that, you know, and also real world data is messy, and that messiness is really hard to recreate. So if you set out to write a test, it's never that good a test, you know, in terms of the test data, because it's just not messy enough. So taking some of the projects that we've been discussing here, and perhaps doing a bit of extra work, you know, metadata scaffolding around them, that would enable you to do so, because that's really interesting in itself, because it leads us to understand what we need to do to our existing information to make it more usable. So it's a really useful, it's the boring, unsexy bit, but I think it's a really useful part of this whole process too. Yeah, and on the messy, both in terms of yeah, sorry, Bob, yes.
No, I forgot to lower my hand. I don't have anything additional right now.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, so what I want that is so important, because we have Vint, is to give him a real world demo of something. Doesn't have to be big. You know, the first iPhone did almost nothing, but it was real world. You know, all the other stuff came later. He is sending the document I wrote about ownership to Tim Berners-Lee, because Tim Berners-Lee did a presentation last week where he talked about VR in quite a different way to deal with ownership. And what I'm learning more and more about ownership and VR, it's kind of scary. Also, I've been thinking a lot about mapping lately. Well, not intellectually a lot, but because I'm probably going to be driving to Poland, I've had to call Tesla for them to help me with the charging stations and all of that stuff. So what that reminds me of is the lack of being able to put things in a VR space. For instance, there, you know, if we were just doing a demo or a movie, instantly on this table, I would have a map of Europe with all the charging stations lit up in different colors and all kinds of stuff. You know, that would be trivial. And then I would be talking to you guys, and at the same time, I would have a document over here. The fact that we cannot combine different kinds of knowledge things in a single space is absolutely crazy. So I think that that is definitely one of our challenges. And that's why document with Mural together as in a multiple data object to try to do in a very open way can become very important. And I do think map is the next thing. We have time in a Mural, but we can also have map, right?
Yes.
You know, when my Ukrainian friend was here on Sunday with his kids, I wanted to do this to talk about the different areas. He was showing me his parents live in Donbass, all these horrible things. And I wanted to do it on augmented reality on the table, but it turned out we had a large iPad, so we used that instead. So it's like this size AR wasn't very big. But it's really, really crazy that these things aren't really being solved in a bigger fundamental issue. There are all these spaces, but they're one single space. That's crazy.
Well, there are several different structures, which I can provide the demo material for if people want to bring them, to work with that. There are several documents that have been created. The report that went along with the mural, and then I wrote an article, a report that we published at Stanford, which was co-authored with two of the CEOs from the major companies, plus a professor at Paul Ehrlich at Stanford, that is, who's been critical his entire life of professors. So I would manage to put the whole bunch of the whole four of us together in an article and got people to agree on it. And it's published, and so there are different, and I have some presentations, PowerPoint presentations, again about the mural.
Bob, I think we should definitely move ahead with mural work. Bob, I think we should, okay? But we should. We're running out of time now today. But I just also wanted to say, I think we also need to look at the creation aspect of it, because the mural is important, but it is created by a team and then given to the world as a published object.
Yes.
We also need to look at what can people do with creating new ones.
Yes, but first, the first step would be to say, how can we update the one that we got with the team?
Yeah.
Because that's a step in the right direction. And if we go too far out in actually trying to create this, the demo, then we create an awful lot more work for people who are all part-time. I'm part-time, by the way. I've got several other projects, some of which are, day work.
Absolutely. Mark, in closing?
Yeah, I just a very quick one. So say, I don't actually think deconstructing, in a sense, what's there in a finished artifact like the mural is necessarily antithetical to the thing of how do we make stuff, because part of the process is pulling all the pieces out, saying, well, if I had to make a new one, how, so this is, here's one I made earlier, let's take it to bits. Oh, crikey, well, I don't know how we do this in the way that we want to do it. So it actually gives you quite a good real world framing. So it stops us sort of rushing off into this thing, well, we could do anything. So in that sense, funnily enough, I actually think it's helpful. It's a totally counterintuitive way to start the process, saying, how do we make one? But in the sense, knowing that we're trying to make something that has been made before gives us some bounding. And I'll just leave it there.
Yeah,
that's right, because it's based on a structure, and the structure is completely explainable.
Yeah. Before we go, with all these different things, Fabien, what do you want to build, if anything, for yourself or in this or whatever? What kind of thing? And how can we support you?
I'll think a bit more. I don't want to just answer on closing to say something, but yeah.
Sounds good. Because, yeah, it's all good. Okay, have a good weekend, everybody, as well as it can be. And Fabien, if I do drive across Europe, I promise not to come to Luxembourg so you can relax.
It's okay, I'm in Brussels.
Oh, yeah, of course, Brussels. I have driven through Luxembourg once. Maybe that's why I said it. But yes, I promise not to come to Brussels. Unless
you can come. You're warmly invited.
Okay, it could be fun. All right, take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Weekend. Bye.